Bienvenue tous. Welcome to Face Off here on France24. Today, Nicolas Sarkozy is going where no French head of state has been before. He's attending a Eurozone finance ministers meeting. His finance minister herself will be there, but Sarkozy's going too. Why, you may well ask? Well, Sarkozy's facing flack over France's debt situation. The Eurozone wants all members to have zero debt by 2010. Sarkozy wants more time. So is this another example of Sarkozy saying one thing and doing another? Like, say, talking all free market, then turning protectionist. Like being Mr. Europe and then bucking the advice of the European Central Bank. Sarkozy has to convince the Eurozone finance ministers his macroeconomic vision is right for France. But what does his approach say to Europe and to the other new countries who might just fancy a piece of Sarkozy's selective approach to Euro policy? So many are asking, will the real Nicolas Sarkozy please stand up? That's today's face-off. Sarkozy, Euro Cameleon. Well, here to discuss this, we've got Sophie Pedder of The Economist. Sophie, thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Facing off with Sophie today, Liz Alderman of the International Herald Tribune. Liz, thank you for joining us too. So, will the real Nicolas Sarkozy please stand up? Which one is he, Sophie?
I think in some respects the problem is a question of expectations. A lot of foreign governments or foreign commentators seem to discover Nicolas Sarkozy after the election, and they wanted him in a way to be a liberal. They thought of him as a liberal. They thought of him as someone finally with a sort of free market economic approach, which went against the French tradition, and he was a sort of breath of fresh air, someone who was much more in the Anglo-Saxon mould. And suddenly they discovered that actually, after all, he's not quite that sort of politician. He doesn't share entirely that economic outlook, and so therefore, there's a lot of sort of second thinking going on. You know, goodness me, who is this man? Is he a liberal? Is he an interventionist? And I think the answer is he's never been either. You know, he's never been a pure liberal. He's never been a pure interventionist. He's always very much been a pragmatic when it comes to economic policy. And therefore, I think a lot of the concern about the way he's running French economic policy today is because no one can quite classify him, and a lot of outsiders are finding that very difficult to deal with.
But it's kind of he's made some very presidential sort of stances, hasn't he? I mean, I'm thinking of like the day he was inaugurated, sort of like going down the Champs-Élysées looking very Kennedy-esque and all that, and talking, you know, walking the walk, talking the talk, but then it kind of changes.
Well, I think that, as Sophie said, I mean, that's exactly what is causing confusion. And Sarkozy, as you mentioned, will be meeting with the Eurogroup of finance ministers this evening. And we've already seen quite a bit of criticism come out of some of the members from Germany, for example, who are quite concerned that, on the one hand, although he has presented himself to the outside world as a revisionist, as a reformist, the fact of the matter is that he does have quite a long track record of dirigism. And his desire to jumpstart the French economy is obviously of great importance. New president, we want Europe's second largest economy to get back on track in terms of economic health. But he has indicated that he's quite willing to completely flout important EU institutions, such as the Stability and Growth Pact, in order to get that job done. And so this raises a question about what is the meaning of those institutions, how binding are they, and if France doesn't play by the rules, why shouldn't anybody else? It's a redux of several years ago.
Question, surely. I mean, this is where I agree with you that the real issue is what the precedent is. It's this set. You know, there are other countries who further down the road could equally come up against a desire to stimulate their economy, to use a little bit more of a looser fiscal policy in order to get growth back on track. And if they do it, they will be able to say, if Nicolas Sarkozy this evening manages to win this debate and persuade his partners to let him go ahead with a later date for getting the deficit down to getting the budget balanced, that they'll be able to use that in their own favour. And then you end up with rules that have lost all credibility and are very, very difficult to enforce.
That's exactly the danger that this entire situation raises. And we saw this actually several years ago when both Germany and France were flouting the Stability and Growth Pact. The difference is that now, under Angela Merkel, she has taken significant action to make Germany a good citizen again of the EU. And France looked like it was moving in that direction, but under Sarkozy, frankly, that has become very questionable again.
I think on the substance front, I mean, what's interesting to look at his argument, Sarkozy's argument has been we need a fiscal shock in order to stimulate growth in the economy. And I think that this is a pretty debatable line to take, because actually in France, one of the things that has been consistent, even during the years of fairly slow growth, has been a very strong domestic demand. Consumption in the economy, people are spending on all sorts of goods, white goods, you name it, they've been spending. And there hasn't been a problem in the economy of demand. It hasn't been the issue. Yet, so I think it's very debatable that France even needs this sort of fiscal shock. Where I think he does have a point is the idea that you need to tax the French economy less in order to lift growth rates in the long term. That is absolutely right. But I think there's a confusion here about what exactly he's trying to do with this fiscal package, and which is what he's using as an argument for needing to keep the balanced budget further on down the road.
What about this line about, he's criticising the fact the euro's too strong as well? I mean, he's obviously trying to tell the ECB how to do their job.
Well, there's a very difficult issue there. I mean, it's a very popular line to sell because you can blame anyone else, an outside force, for the problems of French companies.
That's a British thing,
It's a very convenient argument for a politician to use. But I mean, the important thing to remember is that Germany has also got this strong euro, and German exports are doing fantastically well. German companies have been they've been streamlined. They are very lean. They're very competitive, and they're doing extremely well, not thanks to a strong euro, but despite the strong euro. You can't blame everything for French industry's trouble on the strong euro.
Sophie's absolutely right on that score. In fact, I mean, it's very important for France to look at Germany as a case study because, their house was in significant disarray, economically speaking. They took significant steps, individual businesses as well, to basically realign themselves, to hedge against currency shift. In France, France has a number of world-name multinationals, L'Oréal, LVMH, et cetera, et cetera. Some of these companies are suffering, as a result of the strong euro. But the reason that Sarkozy is jumping on this is because of the problems at Airbus, which, as we remember, was a major point in his campaign. The whole desire to save jobs, despite a clear need to reform the company. And just because, the structural issues at Airbus haven't been addressed, this is really not an excuse to put in jeopardy the independence of the European Central Bank to serve France's needs. In some ways, it also puts Jean-Claude Trichet, a Frenchman who's at the head of the European Central Bank, into a very difficult position as well.
You mentioned Airbus, but obviously that's a fine example of that word dirigisme, which is a cracking word. I love it. It's really great. I mean, obviously, an example there of how Sarkozy's not free market. He wants to get involved in control. Another example of that, isn't it?
But it's also nothing new. I mean, this is what's so interesting about discovering the reactions to Sarkozy on the European scene, as if we have never seen him in action on any economic subject before. Don't forget, in 2004 he was finance minister, albeit for a very short period of time. But during that time, he showed exactly what his colours were. He intervened to rescue Alstom against the European Commission's wishes. He put in taxpayers' money. It turned out, in retrospect, to have been a pretty good investment for the state. But at the time, it looked like an extremely debatable one. He also made sure that Sanofi Aventis took place. That was a very much a merger that was to keep French interests at the centre and to fend off foreign partners for a French firm. I think that is where Sarkozy's real economic instincts lie, and no one should be very surprised to discover them. I mean, this is coming back to the point about expectations again.
So are we being naive when we try and pigeonhole this man who seems to take little bits from everywhere, put it all together and, well, so far so good, make it work? Go for it.
No, I think that in some sense it is a little bit naive, because if you do look at his history, again, I mean, as we've been saying, he has a track record as somebody who likes to put his interventionist hand into the situation. I think the most important question, however, at this point in time is people are starting to ask questions about who Sarkozy really is and whether his actions might wind up damaging important EU institutions that most members, Germany as well as others like Portugal and Spain, have over time managed to get in line with. We are talking about one European Union here. We've got a Sarkozy who, for the 14 Juillet affair on this coming Saturday, is apparently marching, going to be having everything with a French flag as well as a European Union flag. But in order to be a good citizen of the European Union, he needs to play along with the rules.
So if things like, say, the Gaz de France deal, where he's looking to keep this as a state-run concern, is that okay to do that, but still be different in Europe? I mean, is that going to run in some kind of way and be a good thing for France, a good thing for Sarkozy?
Well, I mean, the difficulty is there are conflicts of interest. At any industrial policy issue or industrial merger issue, there are the interests of shareholders, which in strictly free market situation should be paramount. There are the strategic interests of the country which are at stake, but there are also the political interests, and that's where, in the past, France has betrayed very much a sort of form of economic patriotism, which can be to the detriment of the people who actually own the company, the shareholders themselves. This is where we're going to discover where Nicolas Sarkozy falls on that spectrum. He hasn't actually used the term economic patriotism. That was something that his predecessor, Dominique de Villepin in particular, was the one who was, as Prime Minister, who used that term. But Sarkozy has shown himself to be someone who is still in that mould. One point I think is important to bear in mind is we've been talking a lot about economic policy, industrial policy, his European Union outlook. He is, nonetheless, what I would consider really quite liberal on other fronts, and that is what does distinguish him from other French political leaders. Thinking about the labour market, thinking about the role of unions in France, thinking about some of the reforms he wants to make to public sector pensions. There are elements of his policy which are liberal. I think what people are finding very difficult is reconciling someone who appears on some areas, some points to be a liberal and on some points to be an interventionist. I don't think he's classifiable. I don't think you can put a name on him and say he's liberal, he's interventionist. It depends what subject you're talking about. He is pragmatic, but I think one has to balance where he is overstepping the line towards too much interventionism with the points where he really is prepared to shake up the French economy in ways it does actually need.
But certainly during his presidential campaign, I mean, all the talk was about opening things up, all the talk was about rupture, breaking away from the past, those kind of things. But a lot of what he's doing just seems to be very much in the line of Chirac and other Gaullist leaders, doesn't it?
Yeah, but I mean, it's true what Sophie says, that he is, for example, being a little bit more hardline with the unions, or at least he would like to be. I think one problem, though, with France is that we found that you cannot just try to reform one single sector, as we saw with a measure like the CPE. France is in need of a wide range of reforms, particularly in the labor sector, where we have a consistently high structural unemployment rate of around 9% or so. It's true that demand, as you were saying earlier, has never really been a problem for France, but a problem is that, any stimulus to the economy doesn't seem to be spread evenly throughout the entirety of the French economy. And that's why Sarkozy is in a situation where he's trying to figure out ways to jumpstart growth. At the same time, it's quite questionable whether tax cuts as sort of a trickle-down scenario is something that would work better for France than doing a real wholesale reform of labor markets that, allow people to move more from job to job, allow more flexibility, allow training, allow more of the American-style economic structures that Sarkozy during the campaign said that he wanted to look at to bring some fresh air into the economy. But politically speaking, these will be extremely difficult to push forward. So in some ways, he may be hedging his bets against failure on that front, with this desire to offset that with more stimulus that basically means flouting some of the EU institutions.
So is he kind of like in a sort of, to put a British sort of identity on it, a kind of in a sort of pre-Thatcher phase, as it were? Because Blair could only happen because Thatcher happened. Simple as that.
In a way, but I mean, my argument on that front has always been that Thatcher happened because Britain was in such a state of crisis.
True.
France isn't in that state of crisis. France doesn't actually need Thatcher, and therefore France can afford to have Blair.
But he's always argued that it's stultified, it's not growing. I mean, growth's the slowest in the EU.
That is absolutely the case, but I don't think one needs a Thatcher to all France. France is growing very nicely at 2%. It needs 3%. It's not that complicated. It's not that difficult. What he does need to do is to put in place a series of reforms that will enable French entrepreneurs to flourish, employment to be created, and he'll be there.
I'm told I've got to finish, but I'm going to rebel and take some more time. I'm going to ask you one last question, quick answers. Who is the real Nicolas Sarkozy? Liz.
The dirigiste.
The dirigiste.
Liberal Gaullist.
Liberal Gaullist. You guys are good. Thank you very much. That's fantastic. Liz Alderman from the International Herald Tribune, thank you very much. And Sophie Beder from The Economist. We've been debating, well, the real Nicolas Sarkozy. He'll certainly stand up later and talk to the European ministers. Thank you for joining us here on Face Off, and stay with France 24.